In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at using the generic mouse events and a conditional that finds out whether or not we clicked on a button. So this is a really simple example, and you've kind of seen it before. So I'm going to begin by opening up my frame code here and making sure that I'm on the right one. So I'm going to go to F4, make sure I'm on the actions layer, and everything's going to go there, so I'm going to pin that script. So this first one that we're going to do is the generic mouse event. Now, in order to do this, we're going to create a function which is generic mouse. That works for me. And we're going to have an event in there, and it's going to be a mouse event. And now inside that, we're going to do just a quick trace just to make sure that it's working. Oops, I did trace. What we should do is evt.target.name. That's what we should have. And now let's add this to the stage. Stage.add event listener, mouse event dot click, and that will run the generic mouse function. So pretty simple to begin with. Now what we're doing here is creating a variable that's part of that particular function that the mouse event.click gets passed over to it. You could have EVT or E or event. I use EVT often just because I want it to turn black. That way you know it's not a keyword, it is a variable that we're creating. And what I'm going to do here is trace the event.target.name. That is the target of whatever object that I'm clicking on. Now if I want to test this out, it's pretty easy. I can just click on all sorts of different objects, and you'll see it will actually output that name. So that's pretty cool. It actually will give me all sorts of different names here. So you can see that it's actually seeing just about everything that I click on. Certain things, I see. It was kind of interesting. You'll notice like it was giving me instance 30 here and instance 20, and that is because it's actually clicking on the objects that are inside that particular movie clip. So just be aware when you're using that. Now what we're going to be doing here is setting this up so that we can use a conditional statement to find out if it is a certain name. Let's do something. So a really simple way to do this is if the event.target.name equals something in particular that we want it to be, and we have to do a double equals to do a comparison operator. And if it equals something in particular, and the first one we have here is button1 underscore btn. If it equals button1 underscore btn, and that is a string that's there, then what we can do is change the message that's in here, and that message is, I should bring that up to the top so I can see it better. Oops, let me reset this. Bring that up to the top, hopefully. There we go. That's a good way to bring it up to the top. So now, if it equals button1 underscore btn, then we're going to change that generic text underscore txt to button1. So that's just so that we can actually output button1 was clicked there. Now let's do that again, and now we're going to copy and paste that if statement. So now if evt.target.name equals button2, we'll change that to button2. Now of course we can have these do all sorts of different things. Anytime we click on anything else, nothing is going to happen. It will trace what object that we've clicked on, but it's not going to update the text here unless one of those conditions is true. So that's a really nice thing about using a generic mouse event listener. I find that it is an incredibly easy way for you to be able to find out if a button is being clicked at any time. Now we're going to change this around just a little bit, because what I'd like you to do now is actually take the two of these things and add them to a movie clip, and it's fine to call it symbol 1, because now what we've done is we've changed what their original location was. Now the cool thing about it is that it doesn't really matter, because they still have their names inside there. And as long as we are clicking on their actual names or on the buttons themselves, and it doesn't matter where they are within the file. It doesn't even matter if these buttons exist on the stage when we create this generic mouse event listener. This is an incredibly powerful way of checking whether or not the button that you were trying to click on was right. Now there is another way to write this, and I'm going to go ahead and write it now just because I think it's really interesting to see that this if statement can be written a different way. So I'm going to comment out that code, and underneath it I'm going to put in another thing. This is going to be the switch type of conditional statement. So now what I'm going to do is put switch, and inside the switch I'm going to put the event.target.name. All right, switch event.target.name. So what this does is say use everything else below as cases for event.target.name. Now what I'm going to do is do case, and if the case is button 1, so we can copy and paste from what's there. If button 1 and then there's a colon, then I can go ahead and do generic text equals button 1. And I can do a semicolon. I notice there's not a semicolon on the other ones, but it doesn't really matter. Now I'm going to copy that and go to the next one and do case button 2 underscore button 2, and there you go. So let's go ahead and reformat that, just make it look a little bit nicer. So there is a switch and case. Switch the event.target.name if the in the case that the name equals button 1, go ahead and do this. In the case that it equals button 2, go ahead and do this. Now you could have other things in here, like you could trace something else, you could do multiple events, as long as they are separated with semicolons, and the next time that you get a case, then you'd start over with a new condition. So let's test and see if this is correct. So you'll see button 2 and button 1. Ooh, look at that. Now, there's a problem. What is the problem? You might ask. This is what's kind of interesting with switch cases. With switches, it will actually run all of the events at once as long as something is happening, or maybe I'm not saying that right. With a conditional statement, it says if this is true, do that, and it doesn't do anything else. With a switch and case statement, it runs the first condition, then it goes on to see if the next condition exists, and then it goes on to see if the next condition exists. So what we have to do actually to keep it from doing that is to do what's called a break in between each one. And what this does is that stops it from running any condition other than the first one that it finds. So let's see if that works now. Button 2 and button 1. So you'll see that those are running now. So in this tutorial, what we've done is just create a very simple generic mouse event, and we've explored how we can do a conditional statement using switch and case. I should point out at this point, though, it would be smart for us, I'm going to go ahead and comment out that switch statement and see that again. If we're doing this, it would be best for us to probably have an else if statement, because that's just a more clean way of writing it, I think. You have if this target equals that, else if the target equals that, else something else. And then you can even put a statement in here at the end that says else not clicked. In this case, what happens is anytime you run it, oh, I need to have a semicolon or one more of those there. Now you'll have it so that it will not run if I don't click on one of those two. So that's just something else just to be aware of. I know this could be a little confusing just because I'm going through a lot in this tutorial. But I just want to point out that you can do these different ways. Some ways are a little bit better. It doesn't really matter if you use a conditional statement using if or you use a conditional statement using switch. They're just options. The nice thing about a switch statement is that you can run multiple events, whereas with a conditional statement, a regular if conditional statement, as soon as one of these events happens, then it jumps you out of the entire if statement loop. So if you're doing really complex generic mouse events that you want multiple things to kind of happen, in some ways it might be best to have a switch, because then you can control if it breaks out of the conditional statement loop of all of them or if it doesn't. So just something to think about for the future. So what we're going to do is now save this work, and we're going to go on to the next statement where we use the numbers using the if statement.